China, Egypt, Scandinavia, the Americas, cultures separated by vast oceans, by millennia of time, by language, belief, and environment. Civilizations that never met, that never exchanged stories or scrolls. And yet, strangely, all of them spoke of one thing, one creature. Dragons. Massive, flying beasts, towering reptiles cloaked in scales, serpents of fire and air. They appear across thousands of miles and thousands of years, not as rare or fringe ideas, but as central figures in mythology, religion, and art. In every corner of the ancient world, these beings ruled the skies, breathed fire, swallowed the sun, and sent men trembling into the dust. But here's the part that keeps researchers and skeptics scratching their heads. These stories emerged long before modern paleontology, before carbon dating, before anyone had a scientific framework for understanding fossils or extinction. And yet, their descriptions are astonishingly similar. Long, sinuous bodies, reptilian scales, enormous wings, piercing claws, a roar that shook the heavens. Sometimes they breathed fire, sometimes lightning. Always powerful, always feared. In China, dragons were celestial beings, symbols of wisdom, rain, fertility, and imperial authority. They were not monsters, but guardians, serene, majestic, serpent-like creatures who danced between clouds, controlled storms, and carried the emperor's mandate from heaven. Their image was carved into jade, painted on silks, and embroidered on robes. In fact, for centuries, only the emperor himself could wear a dragon emblem. Across Europe, dragons were quite the opposite: monstrous, greedy, violent. They lived in caves, hoarded gold, and burned villages. Medieval texts described them as agents of the devil, or trials sent by God. St. George famously slew one. Beowulf battled one. Dragons were the final boss in the medieval imagination, and always required a knight, a sword, and a great sacrifice. Far across the Atlantic, in the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Mayans and Aztecs spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a god of wind and knowledge who brought order from chaos. He was not a dragon in the Western sense, but still a sky serpent, a winged reptile tied to power and divine wisdom. In some depictions, he emerges from the stars, in others, from the underworld. In Africa, ancient oral traditions speak of fire-breathing serpents and massive lizards that guarded sacred places. Some stories describe creatures that lived beneath the earth or in volcanoes, great beasts whose anger caused the ground to shake and mountains to erupt. Across tribal cultures, these beings were not just myth, but explanations for the natural world. Their wrath explained droughts. Their movements explained tremors. They were part of the spiritual ecosystem. And still, none of these civilizations had ever met. They didn't trade. They didn't share manuscripts or messengers. And yet their myths, born in isolation, echo each other in eerie, impossible detail. So what exactly did they all see? The most accepted theory by mainstream scholars is that ancient people stumbled upon massive, fossilized bones, the remains of creatures they could not explain. A towering skull embedded in rock, a ribcage the size of a canoe, clawed limbs, vertebrae as thick as tree trunks. Without any concept of dinosaurs, without a word for extinct, they made the only assumption they could. These were the remains of dragons. In China, the very first dinosaur fossil ever discovered was called a dragon bone. In fact, for centuries, these bones were ground into powder and used in traditional medicine. They were believed to carry the essence of dragons, and thus, health and vitality. In medieval Europe, monasteries kept bones believed to be from dragons, displaying them as sacred relics and proof of divine battles. In truth, many of these were mammoth tusks, dinosaur bones, or the remains of whales washed far inland during ancient floods. But there's a deeper, stranger theory, one that sits at the edge of science, myth, and memory. What if dragons weren't imagined, but remembered? Some researchers believe that our ancestors may have carried an ancient, ancestral memory of massive reptiles, creatures that did exist, and that may have overlapped with the early days of humankind. Consider the megalania, a 20-foot venomous lizard that once prowled ancient Australia, or the titanoboa, a 42-foot-long snake that slithered through the swamps of prehistoric South America, or the quetzalcoatlus, a flying reptile with a wingspan larger than a small aircraft. These weren't fantasy. These were real animals, terrifying in size, imposing in scale. And in some cases, they may have survived just long enough for early humans to encounter them. Could it be that ancient myths are distorted, fragmented memories passed down orally over generations? Stories retold around fires and eventually mythologized into legends? Could early humans, upon seeing the skeleton of a megalania or witnessing the last titanoboa in a rainforest, have planted the seed for the dragon myth? And then there's another layer, even more mysterious. Some dragon stories don't just describe beasts, they describe events. Events that seem geological or cosmic in scale. A dragon descending from the sky in fire. A winged serpent whose roar made the earth tremble. Flaming breath that scorched entire landscapes. To modern ears, these sound like something else entirely. Meteor impacts, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes. What would an ancient person call a fireball streaking through the night sky, crashing into the earth with a deafening roar? To them, it wasn't a meteor. It was a dragon falling from the heavens. It's a way of explaining the unexplainable, personifying disaster. Just as ancient myths described eclipses as giant wolves swallowing the sun, they may have described natural catastrophes as the work of great serpents or sky beasts. Others suggest that dragons aren't memories of real creatures or disasters at all, but something buried deeper in the human psyche, a universal archetype. In Jungian psychology, dragons represent the enemy within, the shadow self, the thing a hero must face to grow. They are the embodiment of chaos, of untamed nature, of fear itself. The knight slaying the dragon isn't just a literal story. It's the metaphor of confronting one's deepest fear, of bringing order to disorder, taming the wilderness inside and out. This may explain why even cultures without large reptiles or access to fossils still created dragon-like beings. Perhaps we are wired to create dragons because we are wired to fear predators, serpents, fire, and the unknown. Dragons become the ultimate test, the final barrier before enlightenment, transformation, or peace. But even if that's true, there's still something we can't quite explain. Why are the descriptions so similar? Not just in theme, but in detail. Clawed limbs, long snake-like bodies, scales, enormous wings, fire or lightning. Always powerful, always ancient. Why does nearly every human culture, no matter how isolated, imagine the same creature? Perhaps dragons were never real in the way we think. Perhaps there were no fire-breathing monsters soaring over castles. But maybe they were real in another way, as forgotten fossils, as prehistoric titans, as metaphors for the chaos of nature and the chaos within us. Maybe dragons were born not just from fear, but from awe. From the primal need to explain a world full of mysteries and monsters. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a chapter in Earth's history we've never uncovered. A time before time. A moment when humans and beasts shared the same sky. And all we have left are the stories. So, what do you believe? And if this kind of hidden history fascinates you, stay curious, because next time, we're diving into another ancient mystery. One that asks, what did the Sumerians say about visitors from the sky? Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this one. Thanks for watching.